American voters, hard also to believe, are still unsure who they will vote for in November. According to a new ABC News Washington Post Ipsos poll, 12% of voters are open to changing their minds on who they'll vote for, and they're less likely to align with one of the major parties. So let's bring in Associate Professor of Political Science at Fordham University, Boris Heersink. Boris, thank you so much for joining us. And Boris, who exactly are these undecided voters?
So undecided voters are kind of a weird group, right? So most Americans probably know who they like, or at least who they don't like. True undecideds are a relatively small group, but they're also sort of a difficult group to capture. There are people who don't really like the two-party system much. And because of that, they often also don't necessarily follow politics as much. So they're not necessarily as engaged with sort of the day-to-day political news. And that makes them really difficult for campaigns to reach and to convince.
And Vice President Kamala Harris certainly seemed to try in her DNC speech to reach out to those independents and more moderate Republicans who may be unhappy with Donald Trump. So do you think the sharp contrast she addressed, is it enough to move the needle in her favor?
It's a really tough thing to do. We've seen Democrats try to do this basically since 2016, like Hillary Clinton also tried to do this. Partisanship is a hell of a drug. It's a very sort of strong thing that ties us to a party. Back in 2016, lots of people thought that there were going to be a lot of Republicans who were going to not vote for Donald Trump. Turns out that that was actually not the case. Same in 2020. I expect the same to be true in 2024. It's just really, really difficult to get people who are sort of really strong partisans in their connection to politics to change their minds. And so what most campaigns end up doing is really focusing, trying to get their own base out. And that's the easier thing to do. But the problem in terms of trying to get undecided voters on board is that what gets your voters excited, criticizing the other side, convincing them that, the opposite candidate is really dangerous, really scary, is not something that necessarily appeals to those voters because they don't like that kind of conflict usually.
Let's talk a little bit more about that, because there is a balance that has to be achieved here, right? I mean, how do both candidates attract those new supporters while keeping their own bases still motivated?
Yeah, so Donald Trump doesn't really seem to try very hard, right? Like if we looked at last week, a lot of it has just been very personal stuff, sort of the same red meat that hardcore Republican, hardcore Trump voters really like. And that's basically what he's been doubling down on. The Democrats over the last week really have tried to sort of broaden the scope a little bit more. They're talking about sort of more broad issues, but they're also bringing in Republicans at the DNC to talk about, I don't like this party, I don't agree with this party, but Donald Trump is such a threat to American democracy that I'm going to swallow that and still vote for the party. That might appeal to a small subset of voters. And one of the things to keep in mind is that this is going to be such a close election, right? In a popular vote, maybe less so, but certainly in the swing states, it's going to probably come down to a couple of thousand votes in different states. Even a tiny fraction of sort of traditional Republican voters switching to Harris could make a difference.
Such a small sliver of voters that this could all come down to. 72 days to go. Boris Heersink, thank you so much for your analysis and perspective.